Hola, gracias por invitarme a esta hermosa ciudad. ¿Le gustaría inglés o español? ¿Inglés o español? Escuche inglés, which is good, because I don't speak much Spanish, as you can tell. But I'm from America, Los Estados Unidos. They barely teach us one language there, so we'll see what I can get through with this. I'm very excited to be here to talk with all of you about Vyper and DeFi. And for those of you who aren't developers, you might be thinking that there might be a lot of foreign language in this. Don't worry, this is aimed at beginners. So even if you're not technical, we hope that you'll come away with this with more appreciation of the EVM, as well as a bit of context into this Solidity versus Vyper wars you might have heard something about. But we think there's been enough fighting in this world. We believe that we should have an end to all these wars, so we're not going to be trying to fan the flames of these wars. We're going to say nice things about both Solidity and about Vyper. In fact, in my night job, I teach a class on Solidity, so if I trash Solidity, I'm out of work. Now, let's talk business here. I know why most of you are here. Some of you have flown from partway across the world so you can sit in your seats and read Twitter on your phones. That's fine, that's fine, it's very entertaining. To aid all of you, in fact, this entire presentation is going to be covering only material from Twitter. So we of course have to start with El Hombre Grande, or Delgado, Vitalik. And he brought Vyper to a lot of people's attentions a few weeks ago when he was talking about, out of the blue, how much progress Vyper has made. And of course, this started up some flame wars. Don't worry, we're not here to inflame these wars any further. But a lot of people don't actually realize that Vyper was started by Vitalik himself. And this was several years ago. Again, more tweets as mentioned. Everything on here is from Twitter. So if any of you are featured in here, please shout out, because it'd be great to meet all of you. And more importantly, if anything in here is mistaken, don't sue me, sue the authors of these tweets. So Vitalik started Vyper out of a clone of an earlier language called Serpent. And you might be saying, what's Vitalik doing? Is he trying to destroy Solidity? Well, not at all. I think everyone agrees that what's important is when we interact with the blockchain itself, when we're interacting with the EVM. So in fact, everyone wants there to be more languages. We want Solidity, we want Vyper, we want other languages. The Ethereum Foundation is in fact funding yet another language called FE. So we want as many different possible languages as possible, because at the end of the day, what's going on with all these languages is they're a very high-level abstraction layer. At the very top layer, we're trying to create these languages that humans can understand, because if you look at what the EVM bytecode is executing, it's horrible. It's these strings of hexadecimal numbers. They're super well optimized for all your Ethereum nodes, but they are really terrible to program against. So we've invented Solidity, we've invented Vyper, FE, so that humans can work with these things in a much easier fashion. So at the end of the day, more languages, more apps, everyone gets to have a lot more fun. As mentioned, we're here for a call for unity, so we're going to start this off by featuring a number of Vyper maximalists saying nice things about Solidity. Vyper itself calls Solidity in and of itself. It says this is a good option. We agree. Again, I'll be out of the job if Solidity goes out of business. Curve Finance, company I'm a very big fan of, is built all their contracts out of Vyper for reasons we're going to talk about in a little bit. And they point out that the more competition we have between all these compilers, the better. More compilers, dev features get better, devs are able to build all the apps that we like to use. Patrick Collins, a legendary developer, he also is an advocate that you should just build in what you like. And for a long time, this had been a question of the syntax. If you think that Python's better, use Vyper. If you think that Java or JavaScript is better, use Solidity. But what's interesting is more recently it's evolved a bit beyond this, because there's actually people that prefer the JavaScript-style syntax of Solidity, and yet they choose Vyper, because the compiler is getting very good. It's gotten to a point where Vyper has innovated a lot of amazing things. And this brings us to Verano Vyper Caliente, hot Vyper summer. And you're probably saying, I'm loco. It's invierno, not verano. Well, up north we do things a little bit differently. So up in the north we're all really hot right now, except the developers were inside in air conditioning coding, and a lot of people are enjoying hot Vyper summer. So what exactly is going on with hot Vyper summer? It traces back to April. In April, the Vyper 3.2 got released. And this is a major, major milestone, because before this, Vyper and Solidity, there are actually functional differences between the languages. You couldn't do certain things in Vyper you could do in Solidity. You could only do certain things like NFTs. It was impossible to get a Vyper NFT on OpenSea before this, because there was a certain bytes type missing. Once Vyper 3.2 got released, though, these two moved into harmony. You could do pretty much anything you wanted to do in Solidity versus Vyper. So it was no longer a functional choice. It became a stylistic choice. So Vyper said, hey, give it a shot. Why not try building some apps in Vyper? And here we see ApeWorks, which is a really fantastic tool for learning Vyper, released a great tutorial recently, pointing out that now Solidity and Vyper are compatible. So there's no more technical shortcomings. Vyper's ready for prime time. And people started saying, all right, well, go ahead. We'll give it a shot. And when they did, they found Vyper's actually pretty good. Very clean, very comfortable syntax. And this particular point we're going to come back to quite a bit, which is that miraculously, Vyper contracts, in addition to being kind of nice to use, they tended to compile a little bit better. So we got better gas usage. This one here really warms my heart, because this person here is mentioning that the Vyper has some advantages in terms of the community and the tooling. And this is exciting because just a month earlier, there had been a bit of a war where, in response to Vyper Summer, people who prefer Solidity said, well, we don't like Vyper because it doesn't have the tooling, it doesn't have the ecosystem. But this is very fast growing, and this is thanks to a lot of the amazing work that's been done. If you know about Paradigm Capital, it was a really big win when all of a sudden some of the team there started looking things over and saying, you know what? We've taken the Vyper pill. We think that the Vyper is pretty much there. There's still a few cases, like Foundry integration, modules, but generally it's catching up very fast. To talk about how Vyper developed into what it is today, let's go to the core values that underpin Vyper. And really, the values underlying Vyper is what's driven its development to be what it is today. There's three primary goals: security, simplicity, and auditability. So I think anyone who's been following the space for longer than 10 minutes knows that hacks are incredibly common within cryptocurrency. My favorite curve even had a hack itself, although it was thankfully a Web 2 hack, not a Web 3 hack. The Web 3 infrastructure is very commonly, you see a lot of mistakes, you see a lot of errors. So you could see where the emphasis on security is really, really useful within cryptocurrency. In particular, and just here on the screen, we can see a few of the places that Vyper is going beyond security. It's going to be working in the next several months on UX, developer experience, trying to become the safest performing language, and the highest use smart contract language for new projects. So we might within a year see a flippening. But the safety thing we really have to double down on, because thankfully there's not yet been a major high profile Vyper hack, although small sample size. Vyper is this concept that when you're writing code, even if you're a novice and don't understand what's going on, by default, we should just make it easy to write secure code. So it's a great language to learn from scratch, I'd argue, because you can start learning this, and by default, it has a number of things like adding a non-reentrancy filter to make it a little bit safer, make it a little bit easier, and avoid potential issues. And this is one reason that you see a lot of DeFi protocols that have an emphasis on security tend to use Vyper. Another big one is Yearn. You'll notice that a lot of these protocols that do have this huge emphasis on security pick Vyper. It might be causation, it might be correlation, we don't know. But whatever it is, I think that we can all agree that more security in the space is a good thing. But one of the most important features that we're going to drill down a lot is this concept of readability. And it sounds like a bit of a squishy concept, but it's really, really important. Vyper has this concept that by default, it should be easier for the reader of the contract, even if it makes the coder's life more difficult. And even further, if you don't know how to program, you should still be able to read Vyper contracts and understand it. And that's not easy to do. In part, this is one of the reasons that Vyper was built off of Python. And this is more developer wars that go even further back, JavaScript versus Python, and we certainly don't want to escalate these wars a bit. But there is a concept within the Python programming language that it should be easy to follow syntactically. You can look at it and understand what's going on, even if you're a bit of a novice. So this is really important. The Vyper community wants to make sure that contracts are safe, and most importantly, that people can actually look at it and read it. When you're dealing with Solidity, you have to follow a lot more practices, therefore, to actually make sure that your contracts are safe. And this point here is one that we're going to return to a lot, which is this idea that if your code is unreadable, you might be able to squeeze some gas savings out of it, or you can sacrifice the gas savings and make your contract more readable. So there really is an important concept of readability, but it's a false dilemma. You don't have to sacrifice these. The Solidity EVM, the way that the Solidity code is designed, happens to make it currently difficult to write gas-efficient and very readable contracts. But Vyper has managed to do both. And it really warms my heart when I see testimonials like this, when people say that Vyper contract, aka Python smart contract code, very readable for business people, for lawyers. So everyday people can read through and kind of know what's going on. This brings us to the final concept behind Vyper, which is auditability. We all know that a lot of smart contracts pay for expensive audits, and they sometimes don't work. We also know that most people, sometimes they release contracts that don't even get audited. When you are looking at how people behave when they interact with smart contracts, odds are at least about half of you don't even bother doing any due diligence. You just say, good enough, it's on the blockchain, let's throw some money in there. And we can't change that behavior. 40% are just looking for social proof. Only like 10% or so are actually doing any due diligence, and everyone else is just hoping that these people who read through the contract are doing the due diligence. So if nothing else, we hope that more people actually try. We move some of this 40% that are just reading Twitter to trying to read the GitHub, trying to read through and understand, because auditors do their best, but they can't catch everything. So it's incumbent on all of us as a community to do that auditing, to just take a glance, ask questions, and see what we can do. And if we're able to build a smart contract programming language where anyone can serve as an auditor, I think we'll see fewer hacks and fewer funds lost in DeFi. So then when it comes to auditors, auditors still have a place, and Vyper's thought is that if the code is easy to read, it'll be easier for auditors. And this benefits everybody. If auditors are able to get a sense of what's going on and better understand what's happening, then they're more likely to catch some bugs. So there's still a great place for auditors, and hopefully we'll make auditors' lives just a bit easier. So this leads to, these are the values underlying Vyper, and this has really informed its construction. And at this point, I mentioned that this is not going to be a flame war between Solidity and Vyper. There's things that Solidity is better at. Solidity has modularization, and Vyper strictly rejects it because of these principles. Again, there's not a technical talk. So what modularization refers to is that programmers, like me, we're very lazy. We don't want to write code over and over and over again. We want to write a piece of code. If it works, then we just import it and use it again and again and again. Solidity is very good at this. One of the reasons that NFTs and ERC20 tokens are popular is because OpenZeppelin built some templates. So even if you don't know much about coding, you can just import the work people have done, and it's done for you. Vyper currently prohibits this. They are working on a Pythonic version of modularization, which will be coming out soon. But for the time being, it is a choice. So you might prefer Solidity if you want to import libraries other people have written. The problem I see with having extensive amounts of modularization like this is it makes it very tough to audit the code. If you are trying to read through Solidity code, when you import into Etherscan, if you have all these extra imports you're doing, sometimes you have 15 files you have to read through. So understanding how all the variables are moving around between all the files can just become a bit of like trying to guess. It becomes very tricky. So I personally prefer the approach of just forcing everything into one flat file. So every Vyper contract is one file. It contains everything within it. And as a result, you have that one file you can look at and try and audit everything. Now, of course, Etherscan, to their credit, has been making it easier and easier. Auditors had complained about having to sift through many files. Etherscan is one of the best resources and has made it so you can sift through all 72 files, but really, why do you need 72 files? Like that in and of itself is going to become a bit of a pain. So I mentioned that this is not a flame war. Vyper plus DeFi is a match made in heaven. So I'm going to go ahead and grant that, let's say, Solidity and NFTs probably have the advantage there. So this user asks, why is Viperlang overtaking Solidity? And I'm going to say that Easy E. Miller, I hope you're not here, is wrong, because Vyper is not overtaking Solidity. You can all look at the most recent 10 contracts deployed to Etherscan, and I'm willing to bet there's not a single Vyper contract in there. I'm also willing to bet that maybe half of them are NFT contracts. Funny enough, we have this amazing global supercomputer, and its primary application at this point is printing expensive JPEGs of things like monkeys. So that's what we want to do with Ethereum. That's great. If you look at the most recent activity on Ethereum, most of this money to miners is getting paid in the form of NFTs. DeFi is smaller than that. Over this particular window, 5.5% of gas used actually went not to Uniswap, not to Curve, not to Seaport. It went to an NFT project called Otherside Meta. And in the course of this, over $100 million was burned just on gas wars to mint this NFT. So I bring this up because my thesis is that Vyper is really gas efficient, and I don't think this is a value add to people who are minting NFTs. People who are minting NFTs probably don't care if they're willing to spend $100 million on this mint. Gas savings might not be a big factor, and that's fine. It doesn't matter if you're paying the contract, if you're paying a gas person, as long as you get your great collectible, it's fine. Which isn't to say that there haven't been really amazing attempts within the NFT world to solve this. So one was the Azukis, which is a very gorgeous NFT. They introduced this ERC 721A standard. So the Open Zeppelin contract's very readable, but not so good with gas. ERC 721A is a less readable version of the ERC 721 NFT standard, but it is incredibly gas efficient. And similarly, OpenSea was authored in Solidity. It's a smart, very, very popular NFT trading platform, and it's a bit gas bloated. So they did an amazing engineering job, and really you should read through it because incredible developers are doing all these amazing optimizations to try and build a much more gas-efficient NFT trading platform. But this is where a bit of a battle broke out between the Solidity and the Vyper communities. So shown here, again, you don't need to know too much about coding, but all these pages is the function that is used to transfer an NFT using Seaport. And the important thing to note is that when we looked earlier, we saw that there's all this kind of assembly code, which is the code on the blockchain, and then there's Solidity, which is supposed to be human readable. And what the Solidity is doing is basically directly writing assembly. So a Vyper developer, Senor Pero, wrote that, had a little bit of fun with this, saying that, what's going on? Why are you using this abstraction to just write direct assembly? Why not write assembly language directly? The point of Solidity is to try and make this human readable. You're kind of losing something here. And it's worth pointing out, Vyper doesn't allow you to do this. So this is yet another trade-off. Vyper says, if you're just dealing with bytecode, no human can understand that easily, so Vyper doesn't allow it. If you need assembly, you need to go with Solidity. Fubulobu went a little bit further, and this is really an epic tweet, so we're going to have to break this one down. He was playing with this ERC20 transfer that's going on within this Seaport contract, and he's looking at this transfer function. And if you look on the right here, this is a full function. It's like if you printed out maybe 10 pages of code, and it's really confusing. It's all this stuff. It's well documented, just doing so much under the hood. So we decided to do a head-to-head test. Let's see how this does against Vyper's equivalent, which is 5 simple lines of code. You can probably kind of guess what's going on just by reading it. It's simply taking a token and transferring it. But, that's fine. Solidity's trying to sacrifice readability for gas consumption. So much to Fubulobu's surprise, the simple version that was not gas optimized in the slightest still comes out better. So he had a bit of a laugh, a lot of casualties, but I think our communities have made true sense then. We bring this up because gas usage doesn't seem to matter for NFT people, and we're willing to bet that most NFT people fall in the category of people that don't particularly care about readability. Given the amount of seed phrase hacks we've seen amongst the Bored Ape community, we don't even know if people necessarily know how to use Ethereum. No offense if there's any Bored Ape people here. I really want a Bored Ape. And just a quick plug, if you are interested in Vyper NFTs, the first Vyper NFT deployed to OpenSea, or deployed and compatible with OpenSea, was written by me. So feel free to check that out. There's a great repository, a lot of fun building it, and it was for an organization that I'm involved with called PackDAO, which is a public goods focused on, in particular, like positive advocacy of cryptocurrency. With so much negative stuff happening with governments trying to suppress cryptocurrency, I think it's a really good cause. So this gorgeous NFT by Scooby Doomer was commissioned and released as the first Vyper NFT that I know of. So I'm conceding that Solidity is probably a good match for NFTs. You can just import the NFT ERC 721 standard from OpenZeppelin, and you don't need to change much, because most NFTs have the exact same functionality. You can use 721A, it's good enough, people understand it, and this is a big concession. We saw that this is most of Ethereum. But I do think that Vyper in particular has a really great use case with DeFi. And we mentioned that there's very, very few contracts that are actually released using Vyper. So if you take a look at most recent contracts, they're almost all Solidity. And yet, despite this, Vyper has this really outsized portion of TVL, or total volume locked, within DeFi. So there's obviously some sort of fit here, where if you're programming a DeFi app, Vyper might be a really good fit. And we look at this in several different ways, but when we're talking about NFTs, essentially you're taking a pile of money, dumping it into a black hole, you don't care what happens, you get your collectible out. When you're dealing with DeFi, every single penny really matters, because you might be trading $1,000 for another $1,000 of a stable coin, and if you're losing out in terms of gas, if you're losing out in terms of slippage, it is like a really big deal. So when you're dealing with DeFi, you have to shave off these pennies. You have to be able to count every single thing. And here's where people are finding that use the vanilla ERC20 token from Vyper, and generally out of the box, it's going to be performing as good, or in most cases better, than the ERC20 equivalent. In some cases, even the hyper gas optimized ERC20 equivalent. But even more so within this, readability also plays into it. So as far as gas wars go, that's a race to the bottom. If Solidity and Vyper want to compete on gas, there's a theoretical limit of what the EVM blockchain can do. But when you look at, for example, Curve, which is a site that I spend a ton of my day focused on, Curve is, people are saying, well, is it actually that much better? It seems like the gas is worse in some case. But if you actually dig into it, it just happens to be because some of these Curve contracts are doing really, really complex stuff. If you look at the baseline, Vyper still is the edge. But where Vyper is a really good choice here is that Curve is using incredibly advanced math. And here's where I'm really, really bullish on just even beyond Vyper, DeFi in general. I really think that we're in this sort of first generation of DeFi, where most of the apps that we are seeing in DeFi are not that complicated. It's usually like give a token, get a token back. And that's great. It can also just be done using a standard 4-function pocket calculator. Addition, subtraction, maybe there's some multiplication and division if you want to get fancy. But we haven't really seen that many DeFi apps that are utilizing some of the complex mathematical capabilities. And I think that in particular, Curve is one that's really using DeFi to its full potential. And at this point, we're not talking about what both languages can do on the blockchain. We're talking about what the compiler is choosing to do, which makes it better to code some of these applications. So if you're building a complex DeFi app like Curve has done and Urine has also done, one of the issues that you come with Solidity for some time was this stack too deep. There's a limited number of variables you can get before the compiler chokes. But Vyper has planned for this and allocated its memory efficiently, and there's no such thing as stack too deep. So you can build the most complex DeFi app using Vyper without having to cut corners. It just makes it a more natural, easier way to program. And then on top of this, the DeFi applications that can be built that are going to be more complex, if you think about it, it was like 2008 when we started seeing the really fancy TradFi products, like all these complex derivatives, and those destroyed the market, so don't build those. But there is room for more complicated math to be done using DeFi. And if you're trying to do that, Vyper has a number of complex mathematical functions built in at the compiler level. So it's right there. If you need to do things like shape rotation, if you need to do things like elliptic curve math, there's functions that exist for that. Again, these are compiler choices, so Solidity could build these if they like, but because Vyper has had these principles of let's build this from scratch, and most importantly, when you're trying to deal with advanced math, it's already going to be tough enough, so make it as easy as possible for the auditors to understand what's going on under the hood. Because the math that's being done by some of these Curve contracts is mind-boggling. If you're not super familiar with TryCrypto, it's a pool that contains Bitcoin, Ethereum, and dollars, and it's able to self-rebalance itself. So in other words, if the price of Bitcoin fluctuates, the pool picks this up without any external oracle. It just does the math on the trade volume and figures out what the price should be, rebalances liquidity itself using some complex exponential smoothing functions. And as a result, it's been up for over a year with no issues. So some incredible stuff being built. We're going to see much more incredible stuff being built. And this ties back to this point we had at the beginning, which is the community, because all these, and the tooling, because all the tooling is being built by a community of people who are finding Vyper very easy to work with. So recently, since Vyper launched, it hasn't slowed down any. It's launching this new feature called Titanoboa. You can think of it as a natural execution layer, which makes it easy to plug into, for example, a Jupyter notebook. Python has a number of great data science libraries, so it wouldn't surprise me if we start to see people integrating much more complex features. Like we haven't seen the mini machine learning algorithms or even neural networks applied too much to cryptocurrency yet, but we can build some very amazing things when it happens. And I think that the kind of natural level of tooling that's being built is going to really assist in this. And of course, all these great tools, here's another one that's being built, is coming just because of Hot Vyper Summer, because all these people are finding the Vyper community and finding it's a great place to make a big impact in cryptocurrency. So Vyper is being built just by the contributors, and there's never been a better time to simply hop into a Discord and be able to ask a question and have one of the core engineers of Vyper answer your question. Toss out a feature request, say, hey, here's what I'm building. I'm having trouble with this. They can actually pretty quickly add something together and have that ready in the next release. They're shipping very fast, and they're shipping really amazing things. And on top of this, like the documentation is very good, but if you have questions, like the community is always there, always ready to ask and answer questions. Vyper, just in case you're curious, it's not funded by VCs. It gets a lot of its funding from a project I had the privilege of working on called VE Funder, which takes curve gauge emissions, and instead of directing this to curve pools, it sends this directly to good causes. Vyper is one of these. So Vyper was the first project that received just a stream of incoming curve pools, so if there's things you need funding for, you might be able to ask Vyper and they might be able to help out. And if that's not enough, amazing ASCII art. So I really believe that together we're all going to be building some amazing stuff, and at Vyper 3.3 we've essentially caught up with Solidity, so we can just imagine what kind of amazing things are going to get released when Vyper 4 gets released inevitably. Finally, a plug, if you're interested in learning Vyper, I've been working on a series of YouTube tutorials in which you can build a ERC20 backed stablecoin, in my case a curve backed stablecoin, not the curve backed stablecoin, and unfortunately I'm not allowed to release any alpha about that, but if you want to build a generic curve backed stablecoin with much simpler likely math, then you can follow this tutorial I've been working on. But other than that, if you'd like to join the Discord, this here link will join you. We'll be happy to chat there, or if anyone has any questions, I don't know if we do Q&A here. No Q&A, so questions are all in the Discord. Thank you everybody, really appreciate this. Adios.